Okay, in this video, we're covering the topic of teams that I originally found this information from this book called Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg. I think that's how you would say it. He's also the author of a book called The Power of Habit. I really recommend that book as well because, in fact, that's the book I think you should read coming into college. It talks about the power of how habits can drive productivity in our lives, and it's just a really good book to kind of get on the right track. So if you happen to be interested in that kind of thing, that's a recommendation. But he follows that up with a book called Smarter, Faster, Better, and there's a whole chapter in this book on teams, and it talks in more detail about Project Aristotle and Google's research into teams. I contacted the author and asked, can I use your chapter 2 without having to have students buy the book? And while he said he wished that he could do that, he is limited by constraints from the publisher, and he sent me the link to this New York Times article that's a part of this assignment. And the New York Times article gives a good summary, but there's a few things missing that I wanted to talk about, and so read the New York Times article, and then let's join me back here in this video, and we'll go through a few more details. Okay, so I'm assuming you've read the article before you watch this video. So let's move on. So what you saw in the article was that there's no one way to have teams in terms of how you make up the team. Sometimes team members are good friends. Sometimes they just work independently. I mean, they work together as a team, but then lead separate lives. And there's no rhyme or reason to have the social makeup of a team. But how teams function in terms of what they call group norms is important. So in the article, it talked about norms being sort of either written or unwritten rules on how people treat each other. So it's the how of teams, not the who of teams, okay? And so hopefully you understand by reading this article why we want you to get involved with interacting with people immediately in Engineering 1301 and as you move through the engineering curriculum. They talk about in the article that business schools have noticed this need and they put that into their curriculum. Engineering schools were a little slower to this game, but it is an important part of becoming a productive engineer. All right, so, and by the way, we hear from our Board of Advocates. Our Board of Advocates is an industrial advisory board that gives us feedback on how we're doing in terms of producing engineers, and what we hear from them is keep up the good work on the teams kind of things. So I know sometimes engineers have the stereotype of being introverts, or I have a whole speech I can make about introverts and extroverts, but we get stereotyped into that, and it's true. Sometimes we are not necessarily known for being social, but I think that's sort of a false accusation in general. In general, we can be as social as anybody else, and hopefully you might have some introverted tendencies that make you a little shy about being on teams, but once you sort of break through the ice, I think you'll feel a strong sense of reward in making this happen. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about group norms. The Aristotle Project identified dozens of norms that seemed important, but which ones were most important? Because sometimes a norm from one team would contradict the norm from another, and both teams were successful. So what should it be? Okay, which norms were the most crucial? All right, so that's the focus of this short video, is to go through the ones that are really the most important, okay? And so the conclusion from chapter 2, Smarter, Faster, Better, which is a summary of Project Aristotle, is the following, okay? So as you participate in these activities, remember, it's a more important thing that you're working on rather than doing the task, right? So you had a task of designing a camera stand. You could go buy that, all right? It's the process of working together as a team is one of the most important aspects of that. So hopefully you feel a sense of importance when you work on that, and you may not immediately. Okay, you may have to think that through, and so I encourage you to do that. Okay, so number one, teams need to believe that their work is important. You know, what they're working on is important. Okay, and so, you know, how do you come up with that when you're working on sort of an academic project like making a camera stand design? Well, you take a larger view. Okay, what you're working on is how to function as a team. That work is important. Okay. Next, teams need to feel that their work is personally meaningful. Right. So, not just meaningful to the team, but every member of the team finds something meaningful in the work. Okay. So, a slight difference there, but an important one. You can't just marginalize anybody on a team. Right. So I want you to think about that as you go through working on teams in this course. Okay. Teams need clear goals and defined roles, and that's often a source of conflict because somehow that has to get negotiated. So, you know, think about that and try to figure out ways to define roles and come up with clear goals to accomplish the goals of your project. Okay, the other is team members need to know that they can depend on one another. That's the overarching group norm. You know, what does that mean? It means, well, you make yourself available for meetings. It means you show up to meetings on time. It means you know, if you're given a task, you make sure that your task gets done. If someone is struggling and needs some help, you try to pitch in for them, but it is important that everyone pulls their own weight and treats each other with respect and dignity, of course. And so that leads to the last one. That was sort of the emphasis of the New York Times article, the need for psychological safety. Okay, so that might sound like a really soft term, but I think it really, if you think about it, it fits in well with Christian principles. And so it's, and Christian principles are one of the things we're about at Baylor, and I think this fits in nicely. Okay, so that's the summary of this important topic of teams. We're going to work on teams throughout the semester, and hopefully you can keep this overarching, higher, loftier goal in mind.